So, everybody, hello. Welcome to the Tuesday Night Live. And we're going to be talking about a topic that is a little different today, one that um, maybe seems different for this channel, but actually is not too crazy different because I feel like it's been coming up a lot lately. People have DM'd me about it, especially in relation to my Akashic Records video. Because in the Akashic Records video, it talks about how you need to be 100% sober of everything in order to access the Akashic Records. Also, anyone who does any psychic work or anything like that, we know that before you access the other realms, it's suggested that you are completely sober for 24 hours before. Like you can't have a drink or anything up to 24 hours before. So this is something that people ask me about a lot also because in my other videos, my ayahuasca video, I talked about how I was a weed smoker for, I don't know, 22, 23 years or something daily. And now that I am not smoking, this is a topic that keeps coming up. So I wanted to talk a little bit about addiction and spirituality because this is a topic that I know many people who are in the spiritual space and many people who are star seeds, indigo children, have special psychic abilities. Hi, everyone over on TikTok. Thank you for all the gifts. You being so generous, you guys. And so I wanted to talk about that today because this is a topic that I know a lot of people are either dealing with directly or dealing with someone in their family that is struggling with addiction. And I think almost everybody knows at least one person who's battling this. And if you're maybe not the person who is, then you probably know someone. So the first thing that I want to start off really with is the number one thing that we need spiritually to advance, to move to the next stages of humanity, to move to the next stages of this planet is compassion. And if you are the person who has struggled with addiction or is currently struggling, number one is the compassion for yourself. You really do need the compassion for yourself. And also, if there's someone's asking if I've smoked since the ayahuasca retreat. I haven't. And I feel great. And I am going to talk a little bit about that. So basically, we have to have compassion also, especially for other people who are dealing with it. People are in different stages of it because this is like the real epidemic, in the world. I can only speak for the US. It's a horrible crisis here. And I wanted to talk about how this kind of interweaves a bit into spirituality. And I know that especially people who are spiritual hold a greater guilt about it because they are feeling like, how do I have all of this information? How am I so aware, but I'm still struggling with stopping smoking, stopping drinking, stopping taking, painkillers or something. So it's really important for us all to, number one, have compassion for everybody that's dealing with addiction, but especially if it's yourself, more than anything, compassion is the number one thing that's needed. So one thing I want to quote from John Jacob Mubarak, who was one of the teachers at Rhythmia, he talked about this and I just loved the way he put it. He was saying how basically, we actually always are trying our best. It's our nature to be trying our best. And when there's times that we're choosing to do things that are not good for us, like say, for example, that drinking, for example, is not good for you. And, some people can, but some people know that they really shouldn't and can't. And if you're one of those people who say, for example, and whatever your substance is or whatever your, vice is, if you feel like, oh God, I know better than this, but I do it anyway, he put it really beautifully. He's like, actually, that person doesn't know better. They are actually doing their best in that moment. And even though they know this is bad for them, they really are doing the best that they can at that very moment, because them still falling back into something that's not good for them, that's not serving them, is really the best that they're able to do at that moment. And I thought that was like, I know it sounds kind of counterproductive, but it's actually very true. They actually are doing as best as they can at that moment. So if you find yourself, you're in a stage where you're trying to cut something out of your life, even if it's something as small as coffee or sugar, which are different. We are going to also talk a little bit about those things. But, if there's something that you're trying to cut out of your life and you're still engaging in it, you have to have compassion, because you have to know this is the best that I can do right now, and be easier on yourself on an emotional level. Not saying to just say, oh, this is all I can do, and, give in. And another thing that I want to acknowledge with people that are battling addiction is that there's this misconception that they are weak, for example. To themselves, they can feel like they're weak, but also maybe other people who don't struggle with addiction can have the perception that they have weak impulse control, weakness in this, weakness in that. They're stuck in something. But in reality, when we really look at it from a non-judgmental point of view, they actually are very strong. Addicts are extremely strong and extremely resilient, because addicts actually defy death every day. They're literally defying death every day. And if those were in other aspects of life, we'd be like, wow, that person is so strong and so resilient. But when it's in this aspect, we perceive it as a weakness. So I'm not saying at all that addiction is some type of superpower, but we do need to reframe, especially if it's something that you're dealing with yourself. We do need to reframe the perception that you have of yourself. You need to know that you deserve compassion, that you really are doing the best that you can, and that you actually are very strong and resilient, because you're defying death every single day. And then let's go to the spiritual stuff. Now, I talked about this in my Soul series, and this is from the books Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. And one of the things that he talks about is, and also Lee Harris, the channeler, has said the same thing, that basically, because we are just a small fractal of our entirety of our soul, say, for example, our soul is this huge being. And when we come to Earth, we take somewhere between, and this is according to Dr. Michael Newton, we take somewhere between 20 and 70% of our soul with us into the body. Now, people who take higher amounts of their soul actually do have a little bit of an easier time making moral decisions. Sometimes people take less of their soul into the body, and it's harder for them to make moral decisions because they are only a smaller aspect of their full soul. So we know that us here, we are just a fractal, not only of God and source, but we're a fractal of our own soul. So there's always a higher version of ourself that is still in the non-physical world that is also making decisions on our behalf when we don't even know it. Sometimes if we're sleeping, our soul is doing things that we're unaware of. But also when we're awake, our soul is doing things that we are unaware of. This is why sometimes when people pass over, they are greeted by people who are still alive on Earth. And that's also because part of that person's soul is still in the afterlife. So, and then in the words of Lee Harris, the channeler, he says every single day we have 1,000 opportunities to die. Every single day, whether you are dealing with addiction or not, every single person has 1,000 different ways to die every day. So many opportunities. And if you are here, you are absolutely meant to be here. It's not a mistake that you're here. It's not a mistake that you're alive. It's not a mistake that you've survived things. It's not a mistake that you've defied death. And that goes for everybody dealing with addiction or not dealing with addiction. And so it's no mistake that you're alive. So one, that goes for everybody, but especially in the case of people that are battling addiction. And obviously we know that addiction puts people in situations that makes them higher risk of losing their life. And that just goes to show you are still meant to be here no matter what. So even if every day you are taking some type of substance because, and we'll talk about the reasons why people do, but you're taking a substance every day and maybe even hoping that this could be the last, but you wake up another day. You once again continue on with your life. That's because you are meant to be here. So the fact that you are meant to be here means that your story is not done yet. Your story can still go on. There's still a turning point. And, me as a storyteller, as a writer, that's actually a part of every crucial story. So if you guys notice, and I have this weird thing that I love to do, I don't actually watch as many movies as I should because I'm always reading or doing research or something, or then just like mindlessly scrolling on TikTok. But, if you were to look at a turning point in a film and pause it, and for some reason I do this, like I'll watch a movie and like some plot point happens, I pause it. And what's great about digital TV is that you can then see the whole playlist. So say it's a 2-hour movie, you see a 2-hour play bar, even on like this YouTube right now. There's a play bar and you hit pause and this will be like, where in the story is. And you'll see almost every time that there's like a super bad low point, or the beginning of the story starts one way and the story ends one way. And in the middle, you can almost always pause it. And in the middle of the story is when there's either a very low point. So if the movie starts on a high, the middle will be a low point. Or if the movie starts on a low, the middle will be a high point. And this is just storytelling. This is just the nature of storytelling. So if you were to pause it at the lowest point of a movie, most of the time you're going to be almost right in the middle of that play bar. So we are all as individuals on the hero's journey. That's why the tarot deck resonates. That's why all of these movies resonate, because each of us are on a hero's journey. And that comes from Joseph Campbell's work. But long before Joseph Campbell, this has existed. The tarot deck existed before him. Well, at least the major arcana is a hero's journey. So this turning point, when you're at your lowest, it feels like it's the end of the story when you're in it. The character always feels that it's the end of the story. But in reality, if you're still here and it's your darkest days, your darkest hours, just know that that's not the end of the story, or it would be the end. So if you wake up another day, you're like, wow, I'm only halfway through the story if you were able to look at it from the outside perspective. Now, I do want to talk about how, one of the things that also came up in the ayahuasca, this came up last week when we talked about synchronicities. Thank you for the gifts over here. So we talked about synchronicities last week and how basically even the darkest points of our life are a synchronicity. And because the universe is already perfect, so there's nothing to orchestrate. We do have free will, of course, and doing these things which are harming us is an act of free will. It is not probably someone's predestined nature to very get off track. However, they still have a destiny to fulfill. And if you're still alive, it's because your soul believes that that you still have a chance of getting that destiny. You still have a chance of fulfilling it. So, oh, nice. And yeah, too, I see some people saying congrats on 4 years and many more to come. It's so sweet. And that's the thing too, is, some people are in the process of cutting something out of their life, whether that's a substance, whether it's a behavior, whether it's even something like sugar or coffee and these things, which are obviously not as debilitating. They're not great for your health, but there's a big difference between a coffee addiction and, painkillers or, an illegal substance or something. But, let's say if someone was to slip up, and of course this is no excuse and just of course, it's not saying like, oh, well, then, I'm still there. I'm not encouraging people to do that if that's where they're at in their journey. But if someone does take a misstep, it doesn't erase everything. You know, a lot of times in the like recovery communities, which, I'm not really a part of, but I've actually dated a lot of sober people, a lot of people who are in AA and stuff like that. So I am pretty aware of the 12-step program and stuff like that. And, like this, they'll say, like, I have, a year, I have 20 days. And, if you end up starting back at one point because something happens, you don't lose that time. You've made the progress. You've already taken the steps forward. So, not to say that it's okay to relapse, but it's also, you don't lose that progress. You never lose that progress that you made. You're never taking steps backwards in the story of your life because, like a movie, like the hero's journey, you're not rewinding. There's still turning points to the story. So, with the topic of AA, and then this ties into spirituality, AA can sometimes get a little bit Christian, but it really is not specific to any religion. But there is one of the steps that says that you need to surrender to a higher power. And, with this topic being about addiction and spirituality, we are going to talk about a higher power. So, with the concept of, this soul being able to make these decisions and the soul, still knowing that you're still on a path and you still have your opportunity to fulfill everything that you're meant to in this life. There is also this aspect of a higher power. And this is interesting because I also talked about this last week with the synchronicity episode. Robert Kennedy Jr. was on Lex Friedman's podcast, and he was talking about how he actually overcame his addiction first from seeing the book by Carl Jung named Synchronicities. And when he read that book and started to notice synchronicity, he started to really be like, okay, I need to, whether this is true or not, I need to believe that there is some higher power that is looking over me, that is watching over me, because that is maybe even in some way keeping score. And he used examples like, okay, getting out of bed and making the bed. Okay, that's a couple points for me in this higher power's eyes. Folding your clothes instead of leaving them on the floor. That's a couple points in the higher power's eyes. Now, it could be any type of thing, that's how he perceives it. But if for you, those points are something different, like you did something nice, you left a nice comment on something, that could be a couple of points for you in your eyes. So I'm not saying that that is the way that will work for everybody, but, that is someone's story of how this higher power concept can help. Now, people in AA, a lot of times, obviously, because they rent out churches and stuff, it does get kind of intertwined. But there's also, people who explore Buddhism and are in AA and, explore all different religions. And it's not one specific concept of God, but that there is something greater. And believing in something greater is the perfect way to feel like there's something to live for. Because now let's get into some of the reasons why people can fall into addiction. Now, there is this concept of it being hereditary or running in families. And, I was looking that up actually right before this. And there's really no scientific proof that shows, and of course, I believe in a lot of things that don't have scientific proof. So I'm not saying that this is, the only thing, but that there's no specific gene. There's no specific gene that they could identify that causes addiction. And even though there's conceptions about, or misconceptions about, certain people are more susceptible than others, really when you look at it, it affects all types of people. It affects obviously we see people who have less resources and less money seem to fall deeper into it, but that's only because they have less resources. Because, you know, living in LA and knowing a lot of wealthy people, they struggle just as much. It's just that with the extra resources, a lot of times they're able to hide it easier because, they have things to fall back on. But I mean, really knowing some very wealthy people and also hearing some very wealthy people's stories, they're also afflicted with the same things. And there's, one of the common things. I mean, personally, what I believe the common thread throughout all addiction is, and the common thread throughout most issues in life comes back to self worth. And self worth is at the core of everything. Really, everything comes down to a self worth issue, because we could talk about it with addiction, but also if we could replace it with, you know, eating disorders, that comes back to self worth. Uh, every single affliction that people have, anxiety, depression, every single affliction comes back to self worth. And now, where did that self worth issue originate? Most times it's going to originate in childhood somewhere. Now, that could be neglect, that could be trauma, it could be maybe growing up with a parent that is already afflicted by addiction, and that leading to other aspects of trauma and neglect. And absolutely, it does appear to run in families because we've seen that time and time again. However, they haven't been able to identify a gene or a brain function that is running through. So is it epigenetics? And as we know, epigenetics is where trauma and actually memories are being passed down genetically. However, they are able to identify that. So I don't know. I do believe that they could probably find addictive tendencies in that. And then also on the spiritual side, is this some type of generational trauma? Is this something that's getting passed down through a lineage? There's many different aspects of this. And really, a lot of them come down to pain. A lot of times, if people are using a substance, it's to divert pain. Now, that pain could be from something that happened. That pain can be, needing to self medicate. Could the self medication be from, you know, a neurological issue or a physical issue? Yeah. It could also be from an emotional issue, a psychological issue. There's a lot of different things that could cause the pain. And oftentimes, when people are using a substance, a lot of times maybe they self medicated at one point and then it got the best of them and it went so long, whereas, I, and now, for me, it would be smoking weed, which is, pretty different than some other substances because it's probably the least addictive of all the substances, or at least in my opinion. But still, just as someone who was a daily user and, not saying that I will never take a puff again in my life, even though, I don't have the desire to. Basically, I started when I was 12 years old. And that was because looking back, obviously in the moment, I didn't acknowledge that there was emotional pain or, family issues going on that I was escaping from. I just thought I was being cool. I thought I was having fun. I thought it felt good. And, that starts at 12. But then it's easy for 20 years to go by and smoking every day. And also, it's something like weed, it doesn't have super debilitating effects. So it's harder to see that maybe there's a problem as opposed to something like alcohol. Alcohol has debilitating effects. It really severely affects your health. It severely affects your life and your judgment and causes people to make negative decisions. And so it's easier to see with other things that are more extreme. And of course, I'm not saying that nobody should never do anything in their life. If you occasionally smoke, if you occasionally drink, if you do this, this is in no way like preaching everybody should be sober. Even in the spiritual community, everybody is an individual. There's no one right way to live. Even when it comes to diet, a lot of times people believe you have to be vegan or vegetarian in order to be spiritual. And that's also not true. Some people need to eat meat, or maybe some people take a 10-year journey of being vegan and then go back to eating meat. And there's no judgment in that, because there is no right way to be spiritual. There's spiritual people who have a lot of plastic surgery, and maybe to some it's like, wow, how could you be spiritual and do all of that? But that's coming from our own judgment. It's everyone to be on their own journey. So this is in no way saying that everybody should be 100% sober all the time. Now, I do believe if you are tapping into other realms, it is something to be cautious of, especially dealing with more intense substances, because, we also know that everything is a mirror. Everything that we're experiencing in the outer world is a reflection of what's happening inside of us. So if we are dealing with these issues of self-worth, of unresolved trauma, of addiction that has come from that, and then especially to be putting some of those heavier substances into your system, I'm not going to say all the words of them because I am streaming here also on TikTok, and I've already said like so many words that get you banned on live. I'm actually surprised I haven't gotten banned yet. So, if you are dealing with something internally, you're going to see that in your outside world. And actually, last week I mentioned that I had spent a couple days with Brittany Bento, and she had a channeled message that she posted recently, and she said it so beautifully that there is no war between light and dark happening in the world. The war is happening within. If you're perceiving a battle of light and dark in the world, it's because there's a battle of light and dark that is inside of you that is looking for attention. And that's profound. And, for me, someone who's been on my spiritual journey for over a decade, I obviously had my UFO experience when I was 5, but like my real in-depth knowledge, my real in-depth learning and research and practices, and still just to 10 years in, just be seeing for real now, like, wow, this battle of light and dark was actually something that was inside of me that I didn't even see myself. That shadow work that I was doing shadow work and didn't even know that's how deep it could be. So if some people might be watching and might be triggered by the fact that there is no battle between light and dark, take 1 second to just acknowledge that possibly, maybe, could be a chance that there's something inside you that is calling out to be seen, something that's in a shadow so hidden you don't even know it's back there, that is causing this light and dark battle to be seen in your outside world. And, so she had a beautiful message about that. And I wanted to piggyback on that on this topic about overcoming addiction, because, dabbling in the spiritual and dabbling also in substances, this causes, on one side, it makes people feel disconnected from source. It also makes people feel guilty and judgmental of themselves. But then that's also going to reflect more in their outside world. And maybe there's going to be more occasions of them being judged, of them, doing something that makes them feel guilty, or just having like a perception that maybe people are judging them. And it's going to amplify that stuff. So this is why it really goes back to what we started with compassion. You really need to have compassion for yourself, because say you're like, oh man, I know that this stuff is so bad for me, but damn, I still had that drink that night. I still did that or did that or did that. And, I know how bad it is. And you want to beat yourself up and you want to kick yourself while you're down. That's not going to help you get closer. It's not going to help you to beat yourself up. What you need to do is obviously not make excuses and ignore it and brush it under the rug, but you need to say, damn, I'm really trying my best my best right now is this, but I know that I'm getting better and better. And this is a perfect affirmation for someone. This is a perfect affirmation for everybody, but especially if this is something that you're kind of dealing with underlying in your life, is the affirmation, I'm getting better and better every day. You just wake up, I'm getting better and better every day. Say you could try to say it 10 times a day. You know, you go to maybe every time you go to pee, I'm getting better and better every day. I'm getting better and better every day, you know? And that way, okay, I'm doing my best, but I am getting better. I'm always getting better. I'm always moving forward. So I always go back to the affirmations. I know a lot of people are, try to say affirmations are, I don't know, toxic positivity or whatever, but those people are miserable. Don't listen to them. I have nothing to say about that except, stay miserable then. I don't know what else to tell you. So, okay. This is also the thing too. So there's social reasons why people fall into addiction, um, genetic, probably epigenetics, because they can't find anything biologically that specifically does that. So maybe for some people, that could be freeing information. If it helps you, take it. If it doesn't, don't. But that there really is no specific gene or genetic anything that they can find that proves that this is inherited. Now, this could be inherited because of your parents' emotional state and because of what they were going through, or maybe because of what your grandparents, what they went through, what they caused in your parents, and now is caused in you. And maybe there is some element of it in epigenetics, but please don't think that you are a prisoner of this because of the family you were born into, because of all people, people from the highest wealth to the most unfortunate situations and everywhere in between deals with addiction. You know, we can say that certain groups, certain communities are more susceptible, but the reality is that every single type of person. Now, on the topic of weed, Carl Sagan was a pothead. Did you know that? Did you know Carl Sagan was a pothead? I didn't know that. So don't beat yourself up. Aleister Crowley. I know he's obviously a controversial figure because he dabbled in the dark arts, but he was a heroin addict. Did you guys know that? Oprah used to do crack before she became famous. Thomas Edison was addicted to putting cocaine inside of wine and drinking it. Also, Sigmund Freud, total cokehead. So don't ever think that because you are dealing with, and obviously every great writer, I mean, hello, we already know every great writer, like Ernest Hemingway, Charles Dickens, Edgar Allan Poe, all of them were super, super addicts, okay? Stephen King, all of his first books, he doesn't even remember writing because he was so strung out. Plus, all these incredible actors, all these incredible musicians more than anything, all the good music, So, and I'm not saying that to say this is the greatness of art or thinking, but it shows that there's so many great minds, so many influential, wonderful minds of our world that dealt with addiction. So don't ever feel like you're inherently a loser or have failed, because literally Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin, all struggled with addiction. This is like a huge part of human history that is often overlooked. And this isn't saying like, oh, great, all the great minds did it, that makes it okay. It makes it human. And don't judge yourself. Don't feel like you're a loser or you're failing at life or that there's no chance for you or any of those things, because Carl Sagan smoked weed all the time, okay? And he's considered one of the greatest theoretical minds of modern history. Sigmund Freud, literally the basis of our psychology. These are like wonderful minds. So don't ever get yourself down. Don't ever think it's the end of your story. Don't ever think that you have already failed. You've already gone too far down the path. You're already unsavable. You've already given up. Because this is the thing, is that addiction is an extremely dark and lonely place. Oftentimes, people don't even want to let other people know that they're dealing with it. And to even admit to it is a great strength. And most people don't even feel safe being able to admit it. But just know, like, it doesn't make you less intelligent. It doesn't make you less of an artist. It doesn't make you weak, but it is a part of your story. And when we look at these people, and instead of only seeing the, the fails, I'm not saying fails, but like seeing the lowest outcome of addiction, which would be death, you know, um, seeing these lowest outcomes, the worst possible outcome, seeing the, Kurt Cobains, the Amy Winehouses, seeing those people, it's easy to look at that as what the outcome will be. But in the reality, and I did look up the statistics before this, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but actually a very small percentage of addictions end in death. Now, it's a perception socially that that is the only outcome, and that's where everybody is eventually going to end up when they do this. But that actually statistically is incorrect. Actually, a very small percentage of addictions end that way. So just remember, like, if you're still here, the story's not over. There's still always a chance. And even though I'm not someone who's gone through AA or anything like that, because thankfully, and like I said, I did drugs when I was younger, Mother Aya kicked my ass about that. If you look at my ayahuasca stuff, it that first night was really rough because of the stuff that I did 20 years ago that still was having effects on the body, because as we know, the issues are in the tissues. The body keeps the score. I don't know if you guys saw that meme the other day. I don't know if I posted it on my Instagram, on my story. It was like, the body keeps the score, and then it said, "I beg you to stop counting." Everything is known and saved by the body. But that doesn't mean that there's no chance. It doesn't mean that this is the end. It just means that the story's not done yet. So there's always, and like I was saying about surrendering to a higher power. If that higher power is God, okay. If that higher power is the universe, sorry if you guys can hear that noise. You probably can't, but my neighbor has a motorcycle and it takes forever to leave. He just bubbles it up for a really long time before he goes anywhere. I don't know if that's a motorcycle thing, but yes. Okay, so now a little bit of advice. One of the biggest things with dealing with cutting something out is habitual practices. Now, I know for me, and obviously this is different than maybe some other things that are more physically addictive, but say with smoking, I associated smoking with a lot of things. I would like to drink my coffee and then smoke, and then get in this little fun balance there. If I were to go out to dinner or something, one of the things I like to do was smoke when I got home, decompress. After I go and have a really busy day, being able to decompress after with smoking. A lot of people like to go home and have a glass of wine at the end of the night. A lot of people like to, if their thing is maybe more connected to some pharmaceuticals, maybe part of their ritual is taking that Adderall before something that is really busy and really taxing on them, or before something that's a crunch. And those habitual things are the places to focus on, because once you kind of get past those habitual things, it does become a lot easier, because a lot of times there's these coupled behaviors. So, say cigarettes. A lot of people like to smoke right after a meal. Oh, I just ate. I need a cigarette. it's the coupling of behaviors. So, an important thing if you are trying to cut something out of your life, and when you are trying to cut things out, it's important to see where those habitual coupling of behaviors are. So, one of the things when I was not smoking, before the ayahuasca was harder. But then after coming back, I would only really get like a little inclination to do it in a coupled behavior. So, say I would go, like I said, do something that was exhausting and then come back, that little coupled behavior. So, maybe you want to replace that with something. One thing that I did was I was started taking that saffron tea, or also making like hot chocolate, but just using like cocoa powder and maple syrup, and cooking that up with some oat milk, so like a little bit, like to replace the smoking. I was like, well, how about I have a nice hot beverage, because the hot beverage also kind of has that little habitual ritualistic element to it. And then it can kind of replace that for the time being. And then you get past those coupled behaviors. But the first thing is to really acknowledge those coupled behaviors, because those are big triggers. Now, another thing, back to the topic of weed while we're on it. Um, I saw a couple of years ago, someone had asked Elizabeth April to channel information about smoking when spiritual. And she wanted to, and Elizabeth April's not really a smoker. So she channeled the information and asked, like, what is the deal with smoking? Because so many people that watch her, because it is very common in the spiritual communities for people to smoke. Like, I would say, really, when you talk to people behind closed doors, most people smoke. A lot of the spiritual teachers do, a lot of the public people do. When I've got to talk to a lot of people, majority do actually. People you would be surprised about are smokers. And so it is something that is so combined with spirituality, this whole hippie movement and all of these things, and conscious thinking a lot of times is very connected to it, and that there's nothing wrong with doing it, you know? But when you do it beyond a way that is ceremonial, when you start to do it as a crutch, when you start to do it as a daily maintenance, when you're doing it to self medicate, oh, I feel stressed, let me have a little something. Oh, I'm bored, let me have a little something. That's when it's not done in a ceremonial way. If you're doing it, like, say, for some specific reason, you're celebrating a friend, you're out of the country celebrating a friend's wedding or something, maybe that's a more ceremonial way to do it, and to do it in more special ways, or only with special people when it's worth it, and not just as daily maintenance of your mental or emotional state. Now, what Elizabeth April had channeled about this was a lot of people who are star seeds or indigos or psychic abilities, or a lot of people who are more spiritually inclined, tend to smoke more because it gets them to like a 0 point. And I actually loved the way she explained it. Is a lot of times people who are, say, like, for example, starseed people, they have these multidimensional self that they used to live on another planet, or they used to live in a non-physical realm, and now they're here on Earth. And there's all these feelings of the body, there's all these emotions, there's all these circumstances, there's all this trauma, there's all this horrible stuff. And then to kind of feel like the smoking brings them back to that 0 point, because it's almost like their soul goes kind of a little bit into like a deficit, not like an actual deficit, but just to explain. Their soul is kind of going into the negative from what their natural state is by being here on Earth. So they kind of smoke to get that feeling to come back to that neutral point of what their natural self would feel like, without anxiety, without stress, without overthinking. Some people do smoke and overthink, and that's why everybody has their own vice and their own thing of choice. Some people don't like to smoke. They like something like more stimulants, you know, But these, especially something like smoking, was what she had talked about in this channeling was, why do so many spiritual people smoke? And she said it's because to get back to this kind of zero point. And not that that's what they need to do, because they need to find other ways to do it. But if it takes you, I think all the time, my journey with smoking, I would have never got here. My general positive demeanor, I know where it came from. It definitely didn't come from the circumstances. It definitely didn't come from life. It definitely didn't come from what actually happened and what I actually lived through. My general positive demeanor came from that little wake and bake. Okay. And that little afternoon bake, a little nighttime bake. Okay. So now with my own spiritual work has been, especially when I've asked the Akashic records, because you can't access the Akashic records when you're smoking, when you're using substances and stuff. So I would ask them, what is that about? My journey with weed. And this is only for me. They said the weed is a plant medicine. However, it's getting you to a certain point in your life sometimes, but it's not meant to take the whole journey with you. It's only getting you up to a certain point of the journey. And, not to bring up something traumatic, but never ending story, when Artex, the horse, gets Atreyu only up to the quicksand, the swamp of sadness. He needed that white horse to get him up to that point. But then the horse couldn't go beyond that. And I know, not to traumatize everybody here, but it's an example. And you see this in every hero's journey. In whenever you watch, Neverending Story is an easy hero's journey for me because I never saw Harry Potter or Star Wars or anything like that. But I'm sure Star Wars is like the same thing. There was probably, or Harry Potter, there was probably something that they had up to a certain point that then they lose and they have to continue the journey without it. But that thing helped them to get to that point. So it's also not judging the years that we did it or that you've used these things. And that goes for all the substances. Almost every time people are using substances, it's because they're self-medicating from something. And maybe that did get them up to this point, but it doesn't need to go the whole way. It doesn't need to go the whole journey with them. Now, sometimes people can use plant medicine to overcome addiction. And one of those things, sometimes ayahuasca will help. More so, especially for people who are more heavily addicted to more intense substances and, the heavier substances, they do say that iboga can help. Now, I don't know. I've never done it. That's actually the guy who created Rhythmia. He actually got his healing from iboga, but he was told to create an ayahuasca retreat because the iboga is too intense, too brutal, too crazy, and the iboga needs more attention. So it's a little bit of a more one-on-one journey, whereas the ayahuasca is more of a group journey. So there are iboga, Ibago, iboga retreats in Mexico. I can add some to the comments later because someone did suggest some of them. If I ever wanted to talk about this topic, that these were the ones that they had heard are the best. And they are more affordable than Rhythmia. And so if someone is really kind of at their wit's end with something like that, iboga or things like that are also extreme measures that could be taken if all of these other methods don't work. Now, one of the things that I was looking up before, so I wanted to see if there was anything, because obviously I know that a big part of AA is surrendering to a higher power. So I wanted to know if that kind of came up in anything else. And what I found is Yale, University of Yale, developed something called, or I don't know if they developed it, but I don't know. I think they developed it. The spiritual self schema. Spiritual self schema. The 3S technique. And it's actually a addiction, getting through addiction method that uses spirituality. And it's very interesting that this came out of Yale University. And they believe that this is one of the more effective ways of overcoming addiction. So it's called the 3S because spiritual self schema maybe didn't sound like the best associated with Yale. So they call it the 3S's. So you guys can look that up if that's something that you're interested in looking into because it's a little bit more using more Buddhist practices and Buddhist modalities to work through addiction, which once again comes back to the self worth. Now, another thing with addiction is that sometimes we have to relearn life skills. If you've gone down that path, you have to relearn life skills. And, in my situation, which of course, smoking weed is much lighter and all of that and way less addictive than other substances. But even with that, one of the life skills that, you have to relearn is dealing with stress, you know, whereas when you deal with stress, you would likely just smoke. Now you have to relearn that life skill of dealing with stress. Now, as the addiction goes deeper and deeper, sometimes that life skill it might have gone so far that some of the life skills that you have to relearn are, taking care of yourself again, functioning again at a job, things like that. But just know that that is going to be everyone's journey. So, even to something that is on the lighter side or something that is on the heavier side, every single person is going to be dealing with relearning life skills. And that's okay. We all have the opportunity to do that even sober, to relearn life skills and to improve ourselves. So don't feel judgmental of yourself if you feel like you have to relearn some life skills, because it's actually a blessing to be able to relearn life skills as opposed to not being here at all. Now, one of the other things, which is in Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton, he talks about how sometimes people who have dealt with addiction in past lives will choose a life where they have a high probability of becoming addicted again. And it's because the soul really wants to test that it has really overcome that. So sometimes there is karma at play, not a punishment, because karma is not punishment. Karma is cause and effect. And, say, for example, you were at the gym and you did, I don't know, 400 pounds of some workout, and then are you never going to do it again? No, you're going to want to go back and try to see if you could still do the 400 pounds, maybe even increase it a little bit. So sometimes a soul is going to kind of do that with a lifetime. Is maybe they had a lifetime that they dealt with addiction. They might want to go back and see, can I still do that 400-pound weight? What if I can do 420? So it's not a punishment. It's that same type of willingness to grow and to get better and to evolve and to progress forward that is also happening even with those things, and probably most people, probably almost every soul has dealt with it in a lifetime or more, at least one lifetime. Now, one of the things I want to talk about too is, as we're coming to the end of it here, drugs are not what they used to be. Casual drug use is not at all what it used to be. The world is not what it used to be. So it becomes more dangerous than it was. Nothing is pure, nothing is clean. Most of the stuff is coming from cartels, and most of it is synthetic now. It's not the drugs that were around in the 70s. It's not even the drugs that were around in the 2000s. They are so dangerous now. It's a much higher risk than it used to be. The stakes are higher than it used to be. So if you are someone who doesn't deal with addiction and maybe you just occasionally socially do things when you party or when you're here or when you're there, I would suggest don't do it. Don't dabble. The time has passed. The time's done. You missed your boat. You might have been on the party boat. Get off the party boat. It's done because the stakes are so high. I know someone who, through a friend, uh, her and three other people all decided that they were going to casually do a little bit of coke, and three of them died where they shared one bag. This was not a crazy, uh, like in the 70s, people used to go on a month-long bender, you know? Now, in the year, this happened like 2 years ago. But in the 2020s, one bag could take out three people. And she had to learn how to walk again. And that's because there was fentanyl in it. So it's not, the casual use is done, you know? This is your message. This is your synchronicity. If you're going to be at a party or something and someone's like, hey, you want to do a little bump or something? Don't even bother, because that time has passed. And I also think that it has to do with the speeding up of time. Now, this is, we're getting a little crazy with the dimensions here, but time is happening faster. That's already obvious. We feel time is happening faster. They already say that, like, the Schumann resonance of the planet shows that time is going faster. Frequency is faster. Everything is happening much more accelerated than it was years ago. The raising of consciousness has led to time speeding up. And with that, more can happen. Like, say, for example, you were to do some type of substance that has a 6-hour lifespan, Okay. So you do this thing that is going to last 6 hours. Now, if time is more compressed, much faster, it's still going to last you 6 hours because we still perceive time as happening the same way, but it's actually happening faster. So that means that 6 hours is kind of going to be 4 hours. So you're going to get a more dense, more intense, compressed version of that than you would have gotten 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. And I know that's a crazy concept and you could take it or leave it, but that in my meditation and stuff has come to me as that part of the reason why the drugs are having a worse effect, on top of them being synthetic, on top of the cartel, which I could explain to you what happened with that, is also the compression of time and time moving quicker, time moving faster, and all of that. So say no to drugs, kids. Say no, because the time is done. Now, there are other things. If you're dealing with sugar addiction, coffee addiction, things like that, you could still use the same things. It still is giving yourself credit, having compassion for yourself, knowing that you actually are doing your best, relearning life skills. That means, waking up and making different decisions. But also, there's no need for us to be perfect. The path of spirituality is not the path of perfection. It really is not. There is no rules anywhere that says you need to be perfect, you need to live this way. It's everyone's own journey. This experiment of reality that we are inside of, the rules don't say that you need to be the most perfect. Maybe your own standards want you to be the most perfect, but there's no rules. So, however, though, when it comes to substances that are genuinely hurting yourself, that is giving you a war inside of yourself. That is something to address. But if it's other things, like, there's no reason to be fully perfect where you need to be vegan and everything organic and no caffeine, no coffee, no sugar, this and that becomes almost to the level of mental illness. That almost is like an eating disorder on the other side. And it's called orthorexia, if anyone wants to look that up. Orthorexia is like the opposite spectrum, is when you become so obsessed with health and purity. It's like the Gwyneth Paltrow syndrome. That's what they should rename it. The Gwyneth Paltrow syndrome it actually is a way for you to control everything. It's probably linked to anxiety, where you need to control every aspect and now control other people and then position yourself into a higher place than other people because I don't eat meat. I don't have sugar. I'm pure. I'm this. I'm closer to God. Once again, everything that we are experiencing is a reflection of our inner state. So, with that, everybody, thank you out there. Thank you, everybody, tonight for being here, doing this little different chat, different than usual. But I don't know. I just felt that this conversation has been coming up so much, and there's no need to be perfect, but every little step of progress is good. Let's say you're trying to quit something and you go a week and then you relapse. That's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Give yourself compassion. Know that you did your best. Know that you actually did make a huge step of progress. And instead of being like, oh, I lost all these days, I lost all this sobriety, I lost all my days. No, start again. It's another day. It's if you woke up today, if you woke up again, that means you're not done yet. The story's not done yet. And just imagine how inspiring your story could be one day. You know, finding your way to help in the world, finding your purpose in the world. And the universe is already perfect. And if you just continue to walk that path, even if you take a misstep in the wrong direction or you sit down for a little bit and then continue on your path again, you're still making the progress. Have compassion for yourself, be proud of your journey. And, you know, you're really, we're not saying to make excuses here, but it is true. You are doing your best. If you still relapsed, that really was the best that you could do. And just remember, I'm getting better and better. I'm always getting better and better. So instead of feeling, oh, I failed, I made a mistake, I'm a loser. Was Carl Sagan a loser? Was Benjamin Franklin a loser? Was Thomas Edison a loser? There might have been other things. They sure were other things. Was Freud other things? Was Aleister Crowley other things? Sure. But they were not losers. None of them were failures. None of them were losers. They all contributed incredible things to the world. They all achieved great lengths. I mean, Oprah literally did crack. And whether I'm not saying Oprah's the greatest person. I'm not saying she's a good gal. But she is an inspiration of coming from something very, very low and very painful and very difficult to a place of extreme comfort and success. And, not that everybody needs to be Oprah or Carl Sagan or Benjamin Franklin, but don't think that you are on the wrong path. Even the darkest points of your life is just the midpoint of the story. And I know this. Look up the hero's journey. Look up the hero's journey in all these different movies. Look at all these moments where it seemed like, obviously, when we're watching a movie, we know that the protagonist is going to win because Hollywood wouldn't make it otherwise, So, say you watch something like Harry Potter, which, like I said, I didn't watch, but I'm sure there's a part where Harry Potter feels like he's not going to make it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a story. And just remember that when you're watching a movie, you have no doubt that the protagonist is going to figure it out, that they're going to make it, that they're going to win at the end, that they're going to succeed, that they're going to fulfill their mission, that they're going to fulfill their purpose because it's a story. But remember that hero's journey is a reflection of the human hero's journey. And that's why we connect with these movies. That's why we like people like Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker. And this is why, we like things like Neverending Story and these great tales, because it is the hero's journey. It's the human journey. And that's what you're on. So remember that. Love you guys. Thank you so much. And, thanks for the super chat. Thank you so much. It's true. Everybody is important, no matter how high or low. It's true. And, like I said, those stories that start high, they have a low point. And those stories that start low, they have a high point. So don't ever think that it's over. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much. And I'll see you soon. Oh, and I'm going to stay on TikTok for like 15 minutes and answer questions over there.